So welcome back for the second half, and this is the last talk in this series on the Dhammapada, which is this little book here, as translated by Sangharakshita. And yeah, this is one of the earliest Buddhist texts. I understand it's like a bit of a compilation of different of many occasions when the Buddha talked about certain themes, and they were sort of collected into chapters. They probably weren't given as chapters when the Buddha was around, but they're collated quotes, if you like. And the text. Well, actually, I think I'll just start off by reading the text, which I'll say a little bit about as we go through the evening. And this is from chapter 14 in the text, and the chapter is called The Enlightened One. And this is what the text says in translation by Sangharakshita. Many people, out of fear, flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, trees, and shrines. In reality, this is not a safe refuge. In reality, this is not the best refuge. Fleeing to such refuge, one is not released from all suffering. He who goes for refuge to the Enlightened One, to the truth, and to the spiritual community, and who sees with perfect wisdom the four Aryan truths, that's the four noble truths, namely suffering, the origin of suffering, the passing beyond suffering, and the noble eightfold way leading to the pacification of suffering. For him, this is a safe refuge. For him, this is the best refuge. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. So that's the text which I'll be talking about today. And we're going to have to do a little bit of a translation and transmogrification of what's being said there. Because I don't know about you, but I've never fled to a sacred grove, hill, or tree in my life, not even once. So that's not really quite what we do in 2023. So yeah, we need to translate that into what does it actually mean in relation to what is being got at. And what we're going to use is terms which are sometimes used in our movement, and that's in terms the terms used are false refuges and true refuges. So I need to say a little bit about what is being referred to here. So in the text we have these sacred hills, groves, etc. We might talk about those as a false refuge. They don't really give us what we want, much as we would like them to. They don't give us the safety and security which we crave, if you like. And in contrast to these false refuges, things that can't ultimately satisfy us, we have the three refuges, the three jewels, if you like, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So this is what was being said here, is that there are some things which we might call false refuges, things which we fondly wish and get deeply engaged in, but don't ultimately fulfill us. They won't ultimately give us what we want. But that's in distinction to the three refuges, the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, which the Buddhist tradition maintains that these are the highest ideals, and it's through these ideals that we can achieve ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction if we follow the path through to its end. So yeah, so what might be being said by we flee to our refuges for safety. So we might think in terms of going to somewhere or to somebody, or engaging in something which keeps us safe from the perils of life. These are sometimes talked about in terms of worldly winds. So for those who aren't familiar with them, these are pleasure and pain, loss and gain, poor reputation and good reputation, and praise and blame. So the negative side of those pairs we could talk about in terms as the perils of life. So we might go to our false refuges, the things or people who we sort of put some faith and reliance upon. Maybe we hope that we will be free from these kinds of perils, the pain, the loss, the bad reputation, and the blame. We may aim to be free from these unpleasant worldly winds. But in fact, those worldly winds will affect us, even if we're spiritually developed. It's how we deal with those things. So that's a little bit about the false refuges. No, I need to say a bit more about the false refuges. So what is actually meant by these false refuges? So I'm talking about them in terms of what we place our reliance upon, which will basically try and aim that we hope that they will keep us safe. Yes, so the thing I'm going to focus on now is, well, get us to reflect. Well, in a few minutes, once I've said a few more things, I think we'll get into small groups, and we'll talk about, well, what do we actually place our reliance upon? If we take a cold hard look at what actually we do with our life, where do we put our attention? What do we do with our life? What does this suggest that our false refuges might be? What do we place undue expectation and undue reliance upon, with the hope that they will give us what we truly want, but they will tend to fall short sooner or later. So I'll give you a starter for 10. I've reflected on this because Mimi's given the talk tonight. So I'll give a short list of what appears to me to have been the false refuges which I have gone for refuge to in at least 4 periods in my life. So some of these may resonate with you, and some of them may not. But I suspect this first one will probably resonate at least with a number of people, and that's going for refuge to people who you love and who appear, to all intents and purposes, to love you. So for me, my mum and dad were without doubt refuges for me. They were a caring mum and dad, who I got on very well with. And similarly, I've got a twin brother, whose name is Jerry, and he looks more like me and sounds more like me than I do. And he's been very supportive, and he'd been very supportive of me. My mum and dad were very supportive as well. They're very caring. So not too surprisingly, I placed some reliance upon them. And yes, they definitely have been people who I'd gone for refuge to. And I remember going to see my mum and dad, and I've been there for about 10 minutes. Oh, it's really, really good to be here. I sort of felt encompassed by an atmosphere of care and loving kindness. And that was certainly very, very, very beneficial, but not ultimately a refuge we can fully rely upon. Yeah, I don't know about you, but we have people in our lives who we really care for, and they without doubt care for us. But if we go beyond a boundary just a little bit too far, then we may get a bit of a tongue lashing from them. So people they're not fully reliable in the sense if we stray too far outside expectations of what other people have for us. So that's one refuge that we may get caught up in, and that's people who we really care for and who care for us. Other things which we might have go for refuge to is activities, particularly activities which we're tolerably good at, and activities which make us feel like at least we're reasonably competent. So if we're really rubbish at something, for example, I'm a really rubbish artist, I'm never going to go refuge to art. So I'm just no good at it, so it doesn't make sense. But I'm a reasonably decent musician, so I've been without doubt going for refuge to music for quite a substantial amount of my life. It's something which which I've been very engaged in, and certainly the social side of music was very supportive as well. And yes, so that's something which I've without doubt gone for refuge to. Similarly, sport. I was quite sporty in my youth. And yeah, particularly things like tennis and golf, and those are the two ones which I definitely was really interested in, and I sort of put quite a bit of effort into those, and definitely went for refuge from them too. I expected them to give me more than they're really capable of delivering for me. And similarly, another activity which I've been very keen on is cooking. So I've gone for refuge to Indian vegetarian food for probably quite a long time. No, it's something which I'm tolerably good at, makes me feel reasonably good about myself and gives a nice result. And I get some positive feedback, so it's not surprisingly, it's been an activity which gone for refuge to some degree. We can only eat so much curry before it starts to pale. So it's not like something that can give you permanent satisfaction. It's good for a while. That's about all. Yeah, I was a reasonably good student when I was younger, so I had a functioning rational mind, and I definitely come to the conclusion now that understanding things at a rational level was a bit of a refuge as well. As long as I can understand things rationally, then I'll be all right. In a Buddhist context, it may sound a little bit dumb, but that was definitely what I was up to when I was younger. I went for refuge to the rational mind, you could say, as a student trying to get good grades. If I got an A, that's good. That's less dukkha than you get a B or a fail. So so it's possible to go for refuge to the intellectual aspect of life, thinking it will give us what we want, but it won't be able to deliver. So just thinking of other things which we might go for refuge to, which you might like to reflect on. For example, if we're deeply engaged in psychotherapy, and some people get they start doing therapy and they do it for years and years and years and years. They find it very difficult to leave. So that it's possibility that may be a refuge for some people. Partners and children could be refuges. Career could be a refuge. It wasn't particularly one for me, which shows how my choice of career may not have been that great, but I know it's something which quite a few people find very, very important. They might go for refuge to their career. Creative activity like the arts, that could be a refuge, has been to me to some degree. Maybe even places in nature, Dhammapada suggesting the sacred hills, groves, etc. But maybe there are places where we might naturally go, maybe our own garden, for example. I'm just thinking out loud here. There may be sort of like some places which would be refuges for us. Maybe we take refuge in our home. Maybe we're really engaged in DIY, certainly not me, but that's maybe something which, means quite a lot to us. So we might go for refuge to our home. Or gardening, maybe that's something which is really an engaging activity for us, which we can really enjoy. And for some people, going for refuge to money. How do you become Bill Gates or Steve Jobs unless you're quite keen on money? So that may be one thing which it is at least possible to go for refuge to, and think it will give you what you want. So one thing which is going to be helpful here is having a sort of a more true perspective on these refuges. If we can identify things which we seem to have gone to refuge to a greater or lesser degree, and get a sort of a more true idea. Well, what do they actually deliver to us, and what do they not deliver to us, or rather, what's the downside of going for refuge to certain things. So I'll for starter for 10, for those of you who remember the University Challenge reference, going back a long time. As I mentioned, that music has been a refuge for me. So, for example, the benefits of being involved in music, one contacts a sense of beauty, a sense of connection to the musicians I play with, using my skill for the benefit of audiences, getting inspired by great performances of other people, and delight and satisfaction in performing, particularly something which I've been involved in creating, and a sense of well-being, positive emotion, pleasure, and concentrated mental states, and a sense of well-being when engaged in music. So clearly there's some benefits of being engaged in music for me, but the drawbacks would be that an almost permanent dissatisfaction with performances. My standards are too high, they're unrealistic, and ultimately it doesn't quite give me what I want. And it's actually quite hard to develop as a musician. It takes loads and loads of hours of effort, which I've been very reluctant to put in over the years, and a sense of not fulfilling one's potential. So there have been some drawbacks in the world of music. So this may be a bit of input for you, maybe to reflect on your own refuges, if you can identify what they might be and think in terms of what do they actually deliver and what are they not going to be capable of delivering. So that's I'm in for time. So what I suggest now is if we go into groups of three, and I'll be finishing my talk later on, but if we go into groups for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll give a bell at the end of the time. And in the group, we'd like to discuss around what seemed to have been refuges for you over the years, and thinking whether there's been sort of an undue reliance, an expectation on certain activities or people, which is totally human thing to do. Basically, going for refuge to things is a very natural thing to do. That's what we tend to do. But that's just something what we do. But when we engage with the Buddhist path, we're aiming to sort of move from things which won't deliver ultimately to the refuges which the tradition says will deliver to us. So that's your mission impossible. So maybe you'd like to go into groups of 3 or 4, and we'll have 10 to 15 minutes just talking about what we think our 4 refuges are. Sorry to interrupt your conversations. I'd like to say a few more things before we finish. So, yes, reflecting on what might we say the differences between the true refuges and the false refuges. So maybe we could say that with the false refuges, at some point our expectations will not be met, and we're going to feel let down in some way. We probably haven't quite clearly seen them in terms of what they can and can't deliver for us. We might see them falsely. We have unrealistic expectations in relation to them, and they cannot deliver what our heart most deeply desires. And a life based around them, certainly in my experience, has only a limited meaningfulness and only a sense of a limited potentiality. But if we talk in terms of the true refuges, the Buddhist tradition has it that they can be relied upon to help us grow and develop spiritually. They can lead us in the direction of awakening, and their capacity to help us grow is limitless and inexhaustible. There's no end to what they can deliver for us, and they can touch us at our deepest levels, and they can transform parts of us which other refuges cannot reach. And it's through the true refuges that we encounter profound truth. And if my experience is anything to go by, a life based more around them is perceived as being very meaningful and has a kind of an unlimited sense of potentiality. So that's my take on how we might distinguish between true and false refuges. So now I need to say something about what taking refuge in the three jewels might mean, what it might look like. So, yeah, when I was reflecting on this, and the Dhammapada talks in terms of a safe, the three jewels being a safe refuge. My first response was a bit said, well, no, having a Buddhist life isn't safe. One's ego gets a comeuppance on a very regular basis, and we tend to encounter some of the more darker aspects of our nature. That seems to be something which comes with following a spiritual path, that some unpleasant stuff comes to the surface and is flushed out, if you could say. So that's not the kind of safety that's being referred to, I don't think. And but when I was thinking in terms of, well, when we're actually in the act of going for refuge, in terms of, well, what going for refuge means here is it's kind of the active dimension of our trust and confidence in the Dharma, in the Buddha, and in the spiritual community. It's what we do which expresses our commitment, which is more than intellectual, has an emotional component to it. When we're in the act of doing that, and say we're meditating quite intently, we're engaged with our practice, and we're, in a sense, we're sort of thriving with it. It seems to me there is a measure of protection. There's a measure of protection from a whole load of unwholesome mental states which could potentially arise. But it does seem to me that when we're actively living out our commitment, that there is a degree of protection and safety from a whole load of negative mental stuff which could arise. So that's my take on the safety element of three refuges, but it's not complete, because the Buddhist life is not one of complete safety, which is I think that's an impossibility in human life, at least in mundane human life. So something is very important to mention in terms of going for refuge, which I'm going to talk a little bit about now, is that this is something that we tend to catch from other people. We can be inspired by our own practice for sure, but it does seem that for the most part, and a lot of people's experiences, is actually spending time with other people who are to some degree committed in their practice. It's something like the spirit of going for refuge gets transferred to us, if like it sort of seeps into us through spending time with people in the Sangha. And it seems to be most likely that that's how we catch the spirit of going for refuge. Probably not very many people can just catch it just being in a cave on their own. Maybe some rare individuals who can do that. But on the whole, it seems to come from sort of like an engagement, a kind of a spiritual friendship engagement with people in the Sangha, when you pick up this spirit of going for refuge. And what's reflecting on how do I understand going for refuge? At some level, it seems to revolve around letting go of the idea that we progress entirely along the spiritual path based on our own efforts. There's something more to the universe which can really help our spiritual path. So that to one level, that means other people. Other people are very important in how we grow and develop in the Dharma. But also, it is as if there are these mysterious spiritual forces which we could symbolize by the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It seems to be that, not taking it too metaphysically, but it's as if there are these profound and helpful and mysterious spiritual forces which seem to be able to help us to grow and develop in the spiritual life. And it seems to be, to me, that letting go of the idea that it's purely about my own efforts, I just have to do it all myself, letting go to some degree of that perspective is something to do with going for refuge. And going for refuge has its positive emotional counterpart in faith and confidence and trust in the Buddha, Dharma and the Sangha. So going for refuge is sort of based on a very positive emotional outlook in relation to the spiritual life. And having this positive emotional aspect, that enables us to be committed to, whether it's meditation practice, even if you don't feel like it on a given day, going to Dharma night if you don't feel quite like it, going on retreat, all these things which require a bit of effort maybe at times. It requires a kind of an emotional positivity, some sort of emotional aspect to our commitment, which allows us to go beyond just our whim and on a given day. And Sangharakshita was of the view that going for refuge is something which all Buddhists have in common. Now, apparently not all Buddhists agree with him, but I think it's a very good working principle that that it's the kind of thing which unites different Buddhist traditions in their own way. People are going for refuge to the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha. And this is the kind of thing which binds the Buddhist Sangha at large. But what's really useful to know is that people will tend to go for refuge and express their commitment in different ways, and sometimes there'll be ways in which we can't quite resonate with. So something which is going to be very useful for us to do is to be quite open and receptive to see, well, how do people express their commitment? And this will help us to see them more clearly, and in fact engage with the Sangha more deeply if we can be open and receptive to seeing the commitment in other people, which may not be quite like our own. And that'll be very useful for us if we can do that. And the last thing I need to talk about is how do we deepen and bring to life this very important spirit, you could say, of going for refuge to the three jewels in our own life. This is, in a sense, this is getting to the heart of the matter of the Dharma life. How do you go about deepening our practice? Something which is always talked about in true metta, deepening our practice. I think we can probably say that it's only really through going for refuge that we can actually deepen our practice. So something that's very important here. So how do we develop going for refuge? We could say our commitment. If you don't like the term going for refuge, let's just put in the term commitment. Maybe that's easier for some people to get on with. So going on retreat is a really important thing, which helps us to deepen our commitment. The conditions which are set up on retreat, where we put aside everyday concerns and we're there with other people who've got a desire to deepen their commitment, their practice, go deeper in their practice. There seems to be very supportive conditions for us contacting our own inspiration and desire to commit ourselves. I would have said that my first retreat was a kind of a watershed experience to me. That I was definitely on fire when I came back after my first retreat, not literally, fortunately, but it was something which a lot of people notice as well, is that they go on retreat and they come back inspired. So it's something which is really important to do. And I just had a bit of a useful realization personally, because I for some reason I've been rather reluctant to go on retreat, but I love retreat. So what's going on here? What I realized, something which I was inspired by, I hadn't quite twigged. It was the simplicity of the retreat lifestyle that is actually, for me personally, very attractive and inspiring. And I need to basically bring that more to mind. So that's one aspect which we might really appreciate and be inspired by on retreat, not just all the Dharma and all the communication, but something about the lifestyle might inspire us. Also, we need to spend time with and even working and living with people in the Sangha. These are all things which are going to help us to deepen our going for refuge. As I said earlier, it's going for refuge is a kind of thing which thrives very much when we're with other people who are practicing themselves and expressing their commitment in ways which might not always be our own. I moved to Cambridge in 2002 to live and work in the Windhorse Sangha. We had a right lively business back in those times, and this has absolutely had a seminal importance on my own life. Living and working with other people in the Sangha would just basically transform my life, and I would have said that was one of the most important and excellent times in my life, just living and working with other Buddhists. So that's a very important thing to do if you want to deepen our practice, deepen our going for refuge, spend time with other Buddhists. We were talking about forced refuges earlier on, and it's not as if we need to say forced refuge is bad, true refuge is good. We've got to get rid of one and move towards the other. It's more that we just need to have a more a better relationship to our forced refuges. They most likely still need to be an aspect of our life. Certainly if it's in terms of people and activities which are very important to us. It's sort of coming into a better relationship to our forced refuges will really help us to go for refuge to the three jewels. But also there'll be some refuges that maybe it'd be good to let go of, and some which we are forced to let go of. So I'll give you a story about my own life. It was going back about 25 years. Both my parents passed away in the space of a year. As I said earlier, they were definitely refuges for me. A couple of years after they passed away, I was a practicing Buddhist. So there's something here about refuges. Looking back at my own life, it's as if there's a bit of a refuge gap. There was a bit of a space. There was a space to be filled in terms of going for refuge, which in a sense was then available when two of my important refuges were no longer around. So it does seem to me that if we're able to or if we're forced to let go of certain refuges, that does seem to open up a space to allow the true refuges more into our life. So if there were some things which we think we can let go of because they're not very helpful, particularly in terms of no, I'm not going to not quite say anything very sensible there. But yes, there's something about relating to our forced refuges in a more creative way, and even letting go of some if that's possible to do so. Another thing that's really, really important for our going for refuge is following our inspiration. And Sangha actually used to use the term guarding our sources of inspiration. I take that to mean sort of treasuring our sources of inspiration and taking advantage of them, sort of using them to our advantage. So basically that means we need to know what actually inspires us to a greater or lesser degree. And if we can really make use of our inspiration, that's really going to help our going for refuge to thrive, if we can tap into our sources of inspiration. And there's a related quote from Padmasambhava, who the main cause of Tibetan Buddhism thriving for more than 1,000 years. And his quote was something like, for faith to arise, you need to practice the teachings of your inclination. So it's important that we know what we get on with, and take time to use teachings and practices which genuinely inspire us, because that's going to help our practice to thrive. Yes, and the last thing I'm going to mention is that so we got the three refuges: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And I may be wrong here, but I'm going to make a suggestion that for most of us, probably the Dharma and the Sangha might be the two refuges which we sort of might get on with best of all to start off with, because if we come on to Buddhist Center, we'll sort of spend some time with the Sangha, and maybe we like a bit of study, like the ideas aspect. Maybe we like meditation, so that's the Dharma. So maybe these are two of the refuges which we might get on with quite well to start off with. So I'm suggesting that maybe at least for some of us, the Buddha refuge may be one which is a little bit more distant, at least in the early days. So it's going to be very helpful if we start to come into relationship with the Buddha jewel. And one way we can do that is to explore the life of the historical Buddha. He had a very, very rich life, a very, very interesting life. And the important thing, probably one of the most important things here is to do with coming into relationship with, and maybe even being inspired by, the qualities of an awakened being. And I think we can sort of get a glimpse of the kind of qualities of the man if we study the Buddhist scriptures. There's so many stories which demonstrate his kindness, his compassion, his ability to communicate, his clarity, his flexibility in how he expressed himself, whether it was parable, simile, in a more intellectual form, speaking to different people at different times in different ways, the kind of clarity and creativity of communication, the inspiration at times, the poetic utterances. Yes, so if we start to get a feeling for the qualities of awakening, which is probably going to be our first doorway into the Buddha jewel, then we're starting to build a relationship with the Buddha jewel. And it is one of the jewels. That's going to be very, very helpful for our practice if we start to come into relationship with awakening, you could say, as exemplified by the Buddha. And some of us might also be quite inspired and find engaging some mythic or archetypal figures. And there are many figures in Bodhisattva and Buddha figures in the Buddhist tradition: green Tara, white Tara, Amitabha, Avalokiteshvara. There's a 5 Buddha mandala. There's a whole load of figures, and some of them we may not really find very engaging at all, but it may be that there'll be one or two which, for some reason, seem to get our attention. So we might see these more mythic figures as doorways into the Buddha jewel, to getting a deeper feeling for the qualities of awakening as embodied by these mythic figures, which we will start to intuit if we really engage with them imaginatively.